Looking at your build, it reminds me of my husband. Jamal paused mid-step, his boot hovering above the gravel as the words settled between them. The woman on the porch didn't flinch after saying it, she just looked at him, her expression unreadable, as if she'd surprised herself more than him. She was striking. Young, no older than 30, with dark auburn hair pulled loosely to one side, a quiet elegance that didn't need to try. But what caught his attention more than anything was the way she stood there in that silk dress, soft, silver-gray silk that clung gently to her frame as the summer breeze moved through it. The neckline was modest, but the way the fabric followed the curves of her waist and hips gave her the kind of presence that silenced the air around her. "I hope that's not a bad thing," Jamal replied, clearing his throat as he turned slightly back toward his van. Grace gave a small, almost wistful smile. "No, not bad. Just unexpected." He nodded and busied himself unloading the tools. The Ford Transit was nothing to look at, paint chipped, the side door squeaky, but it held every piece of equipment that mattered. Mower, edger, shears, a cooler packed with water, pride in his work. His father used to say, "Even an old wrench tightens bolts, if the hands using it know what they're doing." The house Grace's houses sat on the last stretch of Magnolia Lane, where the street narrowed and the trees leaned in over the pavement like they were whispering secrets to each other. The place was beautiful in a faded, forgotten kind of way. A southern manor with tall columns and wraparound porches, its walls weathered like skin that had seen too much sun and sorrow. She walked him around the front yard, her dress swaying lightly with each step, brushing against her legs just enough to catch his eye more than once. But Jamal kept his focus on the job-tall grass, tangled hedges, ivy claiming the back gate like it belonged there. "My husband used to care for all this," she said softly as they passed a broken sundial. "He liked things orderly. He liked routine." Jamal didn't pry. There was grief in her tone, the kind not meant to be touched by strangers. "I'll start with the lawn," he offered, "then work my way toward the hedges." She gave a short nod. "You'll find the spigots near the back deck if you need water." Then she disappeared into the house, the screen door clicking softly behind her. The mower choked and growled like it always did before falling into its rhythm. Jamal worked in long, straight lines, crisp and deliberate. It wasn't just grass to him. It was about proving he took care of what others gave up on. And sometimes, like now, it was about earning enough to keep his mama's medication stocked and his sister's school books paid for. He was halfway through the second strip when he glanced up toward the kitchen window. Grace stood there, still watching. By the time he finished, the late afternoon sun had turned golden, washing the house in a kind of glow that made it look brand new. He wiped his brow and coiled the extension cord when he heard her steps again, soft on the wooden porch, deliberate like everything else about her. "You really take pride in this," she said, handing him a glass of iced tea. He took it politely, nodding. "My name's on it even if no one ever sees the name." She smiled at that, more genuinely this time. The silk of her dress shimmered subtly as she leaned against the porch column, crossing one leg in front of the other. He could smell her perfume, a faint mix of jasmine and something warmer, like amber or cinnamon. "Payment's in here," she added, offering him a cream-colored envelope. "And my card. If you're free next week, I'd love to have you back." Jamal hesitated only briefly. "Absolutely. Thank you." She stepped back toward the door, then turned one last time. "And Jamal, next time, maybe you'll stay for a glass of tea on the porch." His lips curved, just slightly. "I'll think about it." He packed up his gear and slid into the driver's seat. As he looked into the rearview mirror, she was still there standing on the porch with one hand at her waist, that silk dress catching the last streaks of sunlight. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stood there, still as stone. And yet somehow, Jamal felt like she'd just opened a door he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through. Not yet, but soon. Jamal returned the following Wednesday, the late morning sun filtering through the thick canopy of oaks above Magnolia Lane. He arrived early, earlier than he needed to. He told himself it was to beat the heat, but part of him knew better. As he pulled into the circular gravel driveway, Grace was already outside watering the front planters in a light silk robe that brushed the tops of her knees. The soft fabric clung to her as the breeze lifted, revealing just enough to distract him, then disappear. Her long legs moved with slow precision, bare feet on the stone tiles, as if grounded and floating all at once. "Morning," she called, looking up. "You're early. Better to start before it gets too hot," he said, stepping out of the van, eyes down, but posture squared. "I made fresh tea. Still warm if you want it now, or later, your choice." I'll wait till after the work," he said, adjusting his gloves. "Appreciate it, though." Grace nodded, a knowing smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "Suit yourself." He started with the hedges this time. The front ones were high, leafy, and neglected long enough to have turned feral. Jamal worked with the trimmers, moving slow and even. He didn't rush, didn't let the stray thoughts get to him. How the silk of her robe shifted as she walked by with a glass of tea, how she lingered near the porch just a little longer than necessary. An hour passed, maybe 2. The yard began to take shape again, neater, cleaner, as though order might soothe more than just the soil. When he paused to rest his arm, Grace reappeared on the porch. This time, she wore a soft linen dress, the color of cream, sleeveless and open at the collar. Her hair was pinned up, tendrils curling near her temples. She carried a tray, 2 glasses of tea, sweating cold in the sun. "Break time," she said. He hesitated, then walked over. She handed him a glass. Their fingers brushed. They sat on the porch steps. Not close, not far, a comfortable in-between. "You work like it matters," she said. "It does," he replied. "Every yard I touch says something about me." Grace looked down into her glass. "I like that." They sipped in silence for a moment. Wind rustled the trees, the sound like whispers too far away to understand. "You remind me of him," she said again, not looking at Jamal this time. "Ethan, my husband." He didn't respond. "I don't mean just physically," she continued. "It's the way you move, the stillness in your shoulders." He was solid, quiet, the kind of man who didn't say much, but when he did, it mattered. "What happened?" Jamal asked, voice low. Grace exhaled, set her glass down. "Motorcycle accident, last winter, hit by a drunk driver." Jamal nodded, eyes on the lawn. "I'm sorry." She gave a tight smile. "He was complicated. Not all good, not all bad. But I loved him. Still do, in a way." Jamal stayed quiet, not out of fear, out of respect. Grace glanced over. "Do you mind being here?" "No," he said, "but I'm not him." "I know," she said quickly. "I don't want you to be." They finished their tea. Jamal stood. "I'll finish the backyard." She nodded. "Thank you, Jamal." He returned to work. The backyard was worse than the front, overgrowth tangled with old fencing, a cracked bird bath overtaken by moss. He cleared a path, trimmed the hedges, pulled roots. The heat pressed on him, but he didn't stop until the space transformed. As he packed his tools back into the van, Grace stepped outside again, this time in heel subtle, nude-colored ones. Her linen dress swayed with her movements, catching light as she walked down the stone path. "You made this place feel alive again," she said. Jamal wiped his brow. "That's the job." "No," she said. "It's more than that." She handed him another envelope, slightly heavier than last time. "I added something," she said, "for the extra work." He opened it. "Cash, yes, but also a handwritten note. One line. It's not just the yard that feels lighter." He looked up. Grace's eyes held his. Honest. Unflinching. "You ever think about expanding?" she asked. "Eventually," he said. "When the time's right." She tilted her head. "Maybe I can help with that, if you'll let me." Jamal blinked. "What kind of help?" "Not charity. Investment. A real one. For a real business." He stared at her, unsure how to answer. "Think about it," she said. "No pressure. Just think." Then she turned, heels clicking softly against the stone as she walked back toward the house. This time she didn't look back, but Jamal did. He stood there, envelope in hand, sweat-drenched and tired, and somehow more awake than he'd felt in weeks. The breeze kicked up again. The porch swing creaked, and Jamal, for the first time, began to wonder if maybe this job had never been about grass at all. Let us know what you think. Can a man who's only ever known how to keep his head down and work, and a woman who once lost all faith in love, truly heal one another? Don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your feelings, or even just a few kind words for Jamal. And if you believe the world still needs quiet, powerful stories like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to join us on the rest of this journey. Jamal didn't call her back right away. For 2 days he busied himself with other jobs, small yards, quick hedges, nothing that made him think too much. But Grace's words stayed with him, repeating quietly at the back of his mind. Maybe I can help with that. It wasn't the offer itself that made him pause. It was how she said it, like she wasn't just investing in a business, like she was investing in him. On Friday afternoon, as he cleaned his gear in the back lot behind his rented storage shed, he stared at his dented van with the peeling paint and the mower that whined louder every time it started. He thought about his mother's rising medical bills, his sister's college forms waiting unsigned, and then he thought about the way Grace's voice softened when she spoke about Ethan. By sunset, he sent her a text. "Available tomorrow if you need anything done. Let me know." "Oh," her reply came less than a minute later. "Back garden's a mess. I'd love to see you." The next morning, the sky was overcast, clouds thick with promise. Jamal drove through the still streets of Asheville with the radio low, the voice of a local talk host murmuring something about community gardens and forgotten spaces. It felt fitting. When he pulled up, Grace was already outside, standing barefoot in the grass, wearing a navy blue silk slip dress that hugged her curves like it had been sewn onto her body. Her hair was down, soft waves cascading past her shoulders. She smiled when she saw him, not bright, not flirty, but something warmer, familiar. "Morning," she said, voice calm as always. "Morning," he returned, stepping out with his tools. "You weren't kidding about the mess." She laughed gently. "I let it go for a few weeks. I knew you'd make it right." They walked the backyard together. Wild roses had overgrown their trellises, and crabgrass clawed through the garden beds. Dead leaves lay thick beneath the hydrangeas, and a corner fence leaned where the wood had rotted through. Jamal took mental notes, nodding as she spoke. Grace followed beside him, her arm occasionally brushing his as she pointed, the silk of her dress catching the wind. He got to work, headphones in, music low, eyes focused. He cut, raked, trimmed. The silence between them was easy now. She brought him water once, then disappeared into the house. He worked until noon, then took a break under the maple tree near the edge of the yard. As he drank, he heard the door open. Grace stepped out carrying 2 plates, grilled chicken, roasted corn, slices of peach on the side. "I figured you wouldn't eat unless someone handed you the plate," she teased, handing him one. "I'm not good at sitting still," he admitted. They ate under the shade. The food was simple but good, fresh, homemade. Grace sat across from him in a wicker chair, legs folded, one arm resting lightly on the table. "You always this quiet?" she asked. "Only when I've got nothing useful to say." "I doubt that," she said with a half smile. "Ethan used to say that too." Jamal glanced at her, then back at his plate. "He wasn't perfect," she continued, setting her fork down. "He was charming. He had big dreams. But there was always a distance. Even when we were in the same room. Some people live like they're just visiting," Jamal said quietly. Grace looked at him. Her eyes shimmered a little, but she didn't cry. "Exactly." After they finished eating, she stood and gestured toward a worn path leading to a small wooden shed. "I haven't opened that since he passed," she said. "I think there's stuff in there that belonged to him. You mind helping me clear it out?" Jamal hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." The shed door groaned as they pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old leather and motor oil. Shelves lined the walls, filled with tools, boxes, faded photos tucked into the corners. Grace stood near the doorway, arms crossed. Jamal moved carefully, lifting and sorting. Near the back, beneath a tarp, he found a heavy wooden box. Inside were Ethan's things, an old flannel shirt, a worn leather journal, and a photograph of Grace and Ethan on their wedding day. She stepped closer. "I'd forgotten about that. You want me to leave it here?" "No," she whispered. "Bring it out." They carried the box to the porch. Grace sat with it in her lap, flipping through the pages of the journal, eyes scanning but never stopping. Then, suddenly, she handed the journal to Jamal, one page folded down. "Read that," she said. He took the book and read quietly. "Sometimes I think I married the right person at the wrong time. Grace deserved a better man than who I was. If anything ever happens to me, I hope she finds someone who sees her, not just loves her, but sees her. Jamal closed the journal and handed it back. Grace stared out toward the yard. I didn't know he wrote that. You think he meant it? She nodded slowly. I do now. Jamal stood. The sky had darkened, the smell of rain in the air. I should go before the storm rolls in. Grace rose with him, still holding the journal. Thank you for helping. As he walked to the van, she followed a few steps behind. Before he opened the door, she said, Jamal. He turned. I'm not looking to replace Ethan. I know. I just don't want to walk through another year feeling like a shadow in my own home. You're not a shadow, Grace, he said gently. And you don't need saving. She smiled at that. Maybe not, but I could use a little light. He didn't say anything more, just nodded, climbed into the van, and drove away slowly, wipers beginning to swipe across the windshield as the rain finally came. That night, as he sat at his tiny kitchen table with the journal still in his mind, Jamal realized something. He wasn't afraid of Grace. He wasn't afraid of the past. He was afraid of what it might mean if he let someone like her see him, really see him, for who he was. And deep down, he wasn't sure if he was ready. Not yet. The rain lingered well into the weekend, and Jamal didn't hear from Grace. He didn't expect to, but he noticed the quiet. It sat in his chest like humidity dents, not heavy, but always there. Monday morning, he was back to edging driveways and trimming hedges for his regulars. He smiled when expected, nodded when paid, but his mind was somewhere else back at the porch, back with the words Ethan had written, someone who sees her. He didn't know what Grace saw in him. Maybe just hands that worked hard, a voice that didn't push, a presence that didn't try to fill the space. But what he was starting to realize, slowly and uneasily, was that he saw her too. Not the silk dresses or the money or the house, but the ache she carried like perfume on her skin. By Thursday, her name appeared on his phone again. Back garden's overgrown again. I'd like to have you back if you're not too busy. He wasn't. When he pulled up to the house, the sky was overcast again, the same way it had been the first day he met her. The hedges whispered in the wind, and a few leaves skittered across the gravel. He stepped out of the van just as the front door opened. Grace walked out slowly, dressed in high-waisted slacks and a simple fitted blouse. No silk, no heels, just clean lines, hair pinned up, and no makeup except for a single brush of color on her lips. Still stunning, but quieter somehow. You came, she said. I said I would, he replied, pulling his gloves on. She smiled. I know, but still. They didn't speak much as he worked. She stayed near the porch, answering the occasional email from her phone, sometimes watching, sometimes not. By noon, he had the garden trimmed and cleared, the weeds pulled, and the path between the hydrangeas exposed again. He wiped his brow and walked up the steps. Want something cold? She asked. He nodded. Yeah, that'd be good. She handed him a glass of lemonade, the kind with pulp and a slice of lemon floating at the top. He took it, and they sat not on the steps this time, but in the two wicker chairs that faced the garden. They drank in silence for a while. Then she said, I had a visitor yesterday. Jamal looked over. My sister-in-law, Ethan's brother's wife. He waited. She saw your truck in the driveway when she drove by last week. Asked a lot of questions. Jamal took a slow sip. What kind of questions? About you. About why a young man was spending so much time around the house. Why I'd hire someone like you when I have money to spare. Jamal stared straight ahead. Someone like me? Grace looked down at her hands. You know what she meant. He nodded. Yeah, I do. I told her you were good at what you do, and that I trusted you. That usually makes people more suspicious, he said, only half joking. Grace sighed. She asked if I was replacing Ethan. Jamal didn't answer. I told her no one could replace Ethan, she said. But that doesn't mean I need to stay frozen in place either. The wind shifted. The trees rustled louder. Somewhere in the garden, a bird took flight. Grace turned to him. Does it bother you? That they talk? That people might say things? Jamal met her gaze. Only if you believe them. I don't, she said. Then it doesn't bother me. They fell into silence again, but it wasn't cold, just careful. After a long pause, Grace reached for something beside her chair, a small velvet box. She opened it, and handed it to him. Inside was a watch, gold case, black leather band, understated, clean, the kind of thing a man wore not for flash, but for dignity. "This belonged to Ethan," she said. "It hasn't ticked since he passed. I thought maybe it was time someone else wore it." Jamal stared at the watch. "Grace, I'm not asking you to wear it. I'm offering it. There's a difference." He closed the box and handed it back. "I can't take something like that." "Why not?" "Because it still belongs to him, to you, to your past. And I'm not part of that." She held his eyes. "You're part of something else. Something now." He didn't reply. He just looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, he didn't see a woman reaching back toward a shadow. He saw someone stepping out of one. He stood up, setting the glass down. "I should go." She didn't protest. But as he turned to leave, she said, "I meant what I said. About helping you grow your business. I wasn't just making conversation." "I know. And you don't have to decide today." "I won't," he said. "But I will think about it." She smiled. "Good. As he walked back to the van, she remained on the porch, her hand resting on the watchbox like it anchored her. He didn't look back this time, but for the first time since he'd met her, he knew that neither of them were standing in someone else's story anymore. They were writing their own, slowly, carefully, one chapter at a time. Jamal didn't return to Grace's house for the next 10 days. Not because of anything that had gone wrong. If anything, everything had felt a little too right, and that unsettled him. He wasn't used to things falling into place. He was used to grinding, waiting, surviving. Not lemonade on a porch, or a velvet box with a dead man's watch inside. Not the softness in her voice when she said, "You're part of something now." He kept busy. Summer work piled up fast in Asheville. A couple of new clients in the historic district. A church property that needed serious cleanup, and a friend from the community center who asked him to speak to a group of high schoolers about small business ownership. That one shook him more than expected, looking at those young faces, seeing so much doubt behind their questions. Jamal had no answers, just the same ones he told himself. Work hard, stay out of trouble, stay quiet until people see your value. But Grace had seen him without him ever having to say a word, and that stayed with him. On the 11th day, she called. "Hi," she said. "I know it's short notice, but the side fence finally collapsed after last night's wind. I think I need more than a trim this time." "I can be there in an hour," he replied. When he pulled into the driveway, the morning sun was sharp and white, lighting up the dew still clinging to the grass. Grace was kneeling in the garden bed near the walkway, gloved hands deep in the soil, her hair tied up in a messy knot, a loose linen shirt hanging from her frame. She stood as he stepped out. It gave up around 2 a.m., woke me with a crash like the world was ending. They walked together to the side yard, where the old wooden fence had snapped at its base, leaning awkwardly into the neighbor's hedge. Jamal ran his hand along the splintered edge. "Rot," he said. "It's been coming for a while." Grace nodded. "Yeah, Ethan always meant to replace it, but you know how that goes." He did. Promises made to quiet time, but never honored. "I can't afford a full fence build right now," she said. "Not the way a contractor would do it. But if you know a temporary fix." "I can brace it," Jamal offered. "Reinforce the panels with some treated lumber. It'll hold for a while until you're ready for the real thing." "Good," she said. "That's all I need right now. Something that holds." He got to work, sawing and measuring boards from the back of his van, pulling out tools that had been handed down or bought secondhand. Grace brought him coffee, this time black, hot, and unsweetened. "Didn't peg you for cream and sugar?" she said. "Not when I'm working," he replied. As he hammered braces into place, a neighbor emerged across the yard. White hair, khakis, and a collared golf shirt. His walk was deliberate and cautious, but not hesitant. Grace noticed him before Jamal did. "That's Richard," she said softly. "Ethan's uncle." Richard approached, eyes narrowing slightly as he looked Jamal up and down, then flicked to the work on the fence. "Grace," he said with a stiff smile. "Didn't expect to see. Repairs happening this morning." "It needed to be done," she replied evenly. "I got tired of waiting for it to fall on someone." Richard gave Jamal a glance. "Didn't know you'd taken on a handyman." "I didn't," Grace replied. "He's a professional." Jamal didn't speak. He wiped his forehead and returned to his work. Richard lingered a second longer, then gave a curt nod. Ethan would have handled it differently. Grace's voice was calm but sharp. "Ethan isn't here." Richard left without another word. Jamal paused, hammer still in hand. "You okay?" Grace let out a long breath. "They think I'm trying to replace him. Like grief has a rule book, and I'm breaking the rules." "You're not replacing him," Jamal said. "You're surviving him." She looked at him, really looked. That's the first thing anyone said that makes sense. By late afternoon, the temporary braces were up and solid. Jamal tested the fence's stability, pushing against the panels. They held. Grace stood nearby, arms folded, watching. "You want to come in?" she asked. "I made dinner. It's nothing fancy, just roasted chicken and green beans. But it's enough for two." Jamal hesitated. This time, it wasn't about boundaries. It was about what stepping over the threshold might mean. "And still," he said, "yeah, I'd like that." Inside, the house smelled like rosemary and butter. The table was already set two places, a bottle of water in the center. No wine tonight. The lights were warm, not too bright, and the music was soft jazz, just audible behind the clink of cutlery. They ate quietly for a while. Then Grace asked, "Why haven't you ever taken money from anyone before? For help?" Jamal shrugged. "Because help always has a price, even when they say it doesn't." "Do you think I'm lying?" "No," he said. "I think you're used to being alone. Same as me." She nodded slowly. "It's exhausting, isn't it?" He met her gaze. "Only when you realize how long it's been." After dinner, she walked him to the door. No silk, no tension, just silence, and a different kind of closeness. Before he left, she touched his arm gently. "I'm not going to ask again. But if you ever want a partner, not just a client, I'm still here." Jamal held her eyes for a long beat. Then he nodded. "I know." And when he stepped out into the evening air, he realized something strange. The fence wasn't the only thing he'd reinforced that day. Something in him had braced too against doubt, against the ghosts, against the past that never stayed buried. And it held. The following week brought the first true heat wave of the summer. Even early mornings were thick with humidity, the air like warm syrup clinging to every breath. Jamal had scheduled jobs all over the city schoolyards, storefront hedges, a cemetery maintenance contract, but his mind kept drifting back to Grace. Not the porch, not her food, not the silk dresses, but her words. "If you ever want a partner, not just a client, I'm still here." The word partner lingered like a promise and a warning. On Thursday, she texted him again. "Think I found something strange under the floorboards. Do you have time to come by?" He didn't ask questions, just replied, "Be there by 10. When he arrived, Grace was in the side room off the kitchen, kneeling on the hardwood with a crowbar beside her and a few dusty boards already pulled free. She wore jeans and a sleeveless top, sweat dampening the back of her neck. There was something raw in her face, focused, uncertain, like she was chasing a ghost she wasn't sure she wanted to find. "You weren't kidding," Jamal said, setting his tool bag down. "What exactly are we looking for?" She gestured to a shallow crawl space beneath the lifted boards. "There's a box, wooden. I didn't open it." "Why not?" "I wasn't ready," she said. "But I didn't want to do it alone either." Jamal knelt beside her, flashlight in hand, and reached in. The space was tight, filled with dust and spider webs, but his fingers brushed smooth wood quickly enough. He dragged it out slowly, a flat cedar box, hinged with tarnished brass, the initials EA carved faintly into the top. He glanced at her. "Want me to open it?" Grace gave a tiny nod, arms crossed tightly. Jamal flipped the latch. Inside were old envelopes, a small photograph, and a key. The photo showed a younger Ethan smiling, arms around another woman Jamal didn't recognize. The back of the picture was dated 5 years before Grace and Ethan had married. Grace reached for the top envelope, her hands trembling slightly. She opened it and read silently for a long time. Jamal waited. Her face didn't change, but her breath did, shallower, unsteady. "He had another life," she whispered. "Before me." He kept writing to her, even after we were married. Jamal watched her. "You want me to leave?" "No," she said, almost too fast. "Number, I feel like I'm unraveling." Then unravel," he said gently. "You don't have to hold it all together." She looked up at him, eyes glassy but not falling apart. I don't know why it hurts so much. I already knew Ethan wasn't perfect. But this, it makes me question everything. He reached into the box and held up the key. Any idea what this opens? She shook her head. Maybe his desk upstairs. I never used it after he died. They went together. The desk sat in the guest room, half covered with books and dust. Jamal inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked. Inside was a single folder labeled, "If something happens." Grace hesitated, then opened it. Inside were legal documents, a life insurance policy, a letter addressed to her, and a small map with a star marked behind the property line. She opened the letter last. It was handwritten, messy, but full of conviction. Ethan's words poured out onto the page. Grace, I know I've hurt you in ways I've never spoken aloud. There's a part of me that never left who I was before you, but there's also a part of me that only existed because of you. If you're reading this, I didn't get a chance to fix everything, but I want you to be free. Of me. Of the weight. There's a safe buried behind the garden wall. It's not much, but it's yours. Start again. Grace didn't cry. She sat still, staring at the page for a long time. Jamal didn't speak. He simply stayed. After a while, she folded the letter neatly and stood. Come on, she said quietly. Let's go dig up a ghost. The garden wall sat near the far end of the property, where roses had overgrown the stone. Jamal cleared a space, and together they dug, dirt crumbling under their hands. After several minutes, the tip of a steel box appeared. He pried it up. The lock had rusted through, but the lid opened with a firm tug. Inside was a small stack of cash, maybe, a few $1,000s, a passport, and a ring. Not a wedding band, but a vintage ring with an opal inlaid in silver. Grace stared at it. It was his mother's. He never let me wear it. Jamal looked at her. What are you going to do with it? I don't know, she said. But for the first time, I feel like something finally ended. They sat there for a while, the box between them, the dirt still under their nails. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was the start of something that had waited too long. That evening, as Jamal packed up, Grace walked him to the van. You stayed through all of that, she said. I said I would, but you didn't have to. I didn't stay for Ethan, he said. I stayed for you. She looked at him for a long moment, then reached up and gently touched his chest, just over the collar of his shirt. I'm not offering you money this time, or business, or promises. Just a dinner. Saturday. No work. Just a table and 2 chairs. Jamal smiled softly. Then I guess I'll bring dessert. She stepped back, and for once, neither of them said goodbye. Not because it wasn't needed, but because something else had been said already. And as Jamal drove down Magnolia Lane with the sunset bleeding orange behind him, he realized that some stories don't begin when 2 people meet. They begin the moment one person chooses to stay, even when the floorboards crack and the ghosts start whispering. And he had chosen. Saturday evening arrived with the hush of a southern dusk, the air thick with jasmine and cicada hum. Jamal stood at the edge of Grace's porch, holding a bakery box in one hand, wearing his best shirt plain white, sleeves rolled, collar crisp. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, respectful. It was him. The porch lights were already glowing when she opened the door. Grace stood barefoot in a navy blue wrap dress, simple and soft, her hair curled lightly over one shoulder. No jewelry, no makeup, just skin still warm from the shower and eyes that looked different tonight, steadier, lighter. You came, she said with a smile that touched both corners of her mouth. I said I would, Jamal replied, echoing words they had begun to say without thinking. She stepped aside. Come in. Everything's ready. Inside, the house smelled like thyme and garlic. The table in the dining room had been set with 2 plates, cloth napkins, and a single candle flickering between them. There was no music, just the creak of the floorboards and the quiet hush of a home that finally felt lived in again. I made roasted chicken, Grace said, and mashed sweet potatoes. Nothing fancy. Jamal set the dessert box on the counter and turned back. That's more than enough. She poured them both iced tea, then sat, smoothing her dress as she did. He took the seat across from her, and for a moment, they didn't say anything. The candle's reflection shimmered in her glass. Do you miss him? Jamal asked. the question escaping before he could soften it. Grace didn't flinch. Yes, but not the way I used to. I think I miss who I thought he might become, and who I was when I still believed that. Jamal nodded. That kind of missing doesn't go away easy. No, it doesn't. She looked down. But it stops defining everything. Eventually. Dinner moved slowly. Not because of awkward silence, but because they took their time. Jamal told her about his sister's scholarship application, how she'd written about the man who never missed a shift, even when our lights were off. Grace smiled at that. She's lucky to have you, she said. I'm the lucky one, he replied. She gave me a reason to keep going when it got hard. After the plates were cleared, Jamal opened the dessert box and revealed 2 slices of pecan pie. From Mary Beth's on River Street, he said. Figured I shouldn't mess with Southern tradition. Grace laughed, real and warm. You definitely shouldn't. They took their pie onto the porch. The air had cooled slightly, and the breeze carried the smell of cut grass and blooming crepe myrtle. They sat on the swing, side by side, the space between them no longer careful but intentional. Grace turned to him. You ever think about leaving Asheville? All the time, Jamal said. But I've also learned not to run when something still matters. She nodded. So, does this matter? He looked at her. The porch light caught the slope of her cheek, the shine in her eyes. He didn't rush his answer. Yeah, it does. She exhaled. Not relief, something deeper. Something like release. I've been thinking about that offer, Jamal continued. The investment. Grace turned to face him more fully. I'm not ready to say yes. Not yet. Not until I know I can carry the weight of it. I want to build something that doesn't lean on someone else's memory. Her smile was soft. Good. I wouldn't have respected you if you had said yes too fast. But I also want you to know, I'm not walking away from this either. Whatever this is, you, me, the quiet porch, the shared work. She reached over and touched his hand light, but steady. Then let's not define it yet. Let's just keep showing up. He turned his hand, letting their fingers interlace. They sat like that for a long time, the pie forgotten on their plates, the stars rising slow above the trees. Every so often, the swing would creak gently as the wind nudged it. At one point, Grace rested her head on his shoulder, not out of weakness, not from tiredness, but out of choice. Jamal didn't move, didn't speak, just let her be there. And that was enough. When it came time to leave, she walked him to the door as always, but this time, she didn't let go of his hand right away. Drive safe, she said, her voice low, her fingers still curled around his. I always do, he replied. She hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. It was slow, measured, not a beginning or an end, just a moment between. He stepped back onto the porch, the screen door clicking shut behind him. As he climbed into the van, he looked once more at the house, the light still glowing in the front window, and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't a job anymore. It wasn't a porch, or a widow, or a ghost. It was a life being rebuilt carefully, intentionally, one quiet dinner at a time. And he was a part of it now, not by accident, but by choice. The following week moved slowly, like a song played in halftime. Jamal found himself working in a steadier rhythm still, taking jobs across Asheville, still loading his tools before the sun rose, but something had changed in him. It wasn't that he worked less. It was that, for once, he wasn't only working to survive, he was working with something to return to. He stopped by Grace's house twice that week, not to trim the hedges or clear the back path, but just to sit on the porch in the evenings, sharing a glass of sweet tea while the sky faded from gold to blue. They didn't talk much on those nights, and that was the comfort of it. There were no performances between them, just presence. On Friday afternoon, Jamal was packing up after a small yard job when he saw the missed call. Grace. He wiped his hands and called her back. Hey, she answered immediately, her voice quieter than usual. Can you come by? Something's off. I'm on my way. When he pulled up 20 minutes later, Grace was standing in the doorway, arms folded, her expression unreadable. She looked smaller than usual, as if the house had somehow grown taller around her. He stepped out of the van and walked up the path. What happened? She opened the door without answering and led him to the living room. There, sitting rigidly in one of the armchairs, was a woman mid-50s, sharp features, expensive haircut, and the kind of presence that filled a room without permission. Next to her, a man, slightly older, gray at the temples, his gaze moving slowly over the room as though inspecting property. "Jamal," Grace said. "This is Eleanor and Charles Ethan's parents." Jamal froze. He hadn't expected this. Charles gave a curt nod. Eleanor, however, rose to her feet. "So," she said, eyes narrowing, "you're the landscaper." Jamal stayed still, his posture straight. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor tilted her head. "He was in Ethan's office when we arrived," she said to Grace. "Using his chair." Grace crossed her arms. "He wasn't using anything. He was helping me with some paperwork. The house is mine now, so is everything in it." Charles cleared his throat. "We're not here to argue. We just came to check in. We haven't seen you in months." Grace's jaw tightened. "You didn't check in after the funeral, or when I nearly lost the house last fall. You didn't even come when I asked you to help go through Ethan's things." "That was grief," Eleanor said quickly. "We were mourning." "No," Grace replied, her voice sharp. "You were protecting his memory, even when it meant leaving me alone." Eleanor looked to Jamal, then back at Grace. "Is this what you want now? Someone like him?" Jamal didn't move. He wasn't surprised by the phrasing. The world had prepared him for that brand of insult long ago. But Grace did move. She stepped closer to Eleanor, her voice low, controlled. "You don't get to say that. Not in this house. Not ever." Charles stood then, placing a calming hand on his wife's shoulder. "Grace, we just worry. This all feels sudden. You're making choices we don't understand." "Then let me make it clear," Grace said. "Jamal isn't replacing Ethan. He's not pretending to be someone else. He's here because I want him to be. And not 1 inch of this house belongs to your expectations anymore." Eleanor's eyes filled with restrained rage. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Jamal took a quiet step forward. "I don't want to cause tension," he said calmly, "but I'm not going to apologize for being here. Grace didn't ask me to speak for her, but I won't stand here like I don't matter either." Charles nodded, almost respectfully. "Understood." Eleanor's lips thinned. She took her purse and turned to Grace. "I hope you know what you're doing." "I do," Grace replied, for the first time in a long while. They left without another word. The silence that followed was heavy. Jamal didn't speak. He just looked at Grace, who stood in the middle of the room, arms at her sides, her breath coming slow and shaky. "That was overdue," she finally said. "You okay?" he asked. She gave a short laugh. "Not even close, but I feel free." He walked over, and for the first time, he touched her without hesitation, his hand on the small of her back, grounding her. She leaned into him, not seeking comfort, but sharing space. "You sure you're ready for what comes next?" he asked. "I wasn't ready for today," she admitted. "But I made it through." They stood there for a moment longer, the house unusually quiet. Then Grace pulled back just slightly and looked up at him. "You didn't flinch," she said. "Not once." "I've been through worse," Jamal replied. "That's not why," she said softly. "It's because you know who you are." He didn't answer that, didn't need to. That evening, after they ate a quiet dinner and shared another slice of pecan pie on the porch, Grace walked Jamal to the door like she always did. Before he left, she said, "They'll talk, more of them, Ethan's circle, maybe even neighbors." "Let them," Jamal said. "I don't live for their stories." She touched his cheek, her fingers gentle. "Neither do I." And as he stepped off the porch and into the evening twilight, Jamal felt something shift in the air, not just around them, but inside them both. Because love wasn't a promise carved in stone. It was a decision made again and again, in silence and in storms, beneath judgmental eyes and behind closed doors. And tonight, that choice had been mad aloud and clear. Autumn arrived quietly in Asheville, not with a sudden chill but with a slow turning of color. The trees around Magnolia Lane blushed gold and rust, their leaves catching the morning light like little lanterns before falling to earth. The summer that had started with overgrown hedges and unspoken grief had now become something else entirely, something neither Jamal nor Grace could have predicted. It had been 6 weeks since Eleanor and Charles had stormed out of the house. Since then, the phone calls had stopped. No more passive-aggressive texts. No more neighborly drive-bys pretending to admire the roses. It was as if, in speaking her truth, Grace had closed a door the world never expected her to touch. And when it slammed shut, she didn't flinch. She simply stepped into the room she had always owned. Jamal came by more regularly now, but not with tools in hand. Some days he brought groceries. Other days, blueprints designs for a potential small office space downtown, a real shopfront for Green Line Yard services. Grace helped him brainstorm names for service packages, email templates for new clients, even a modest website. They had created something together, not a business, not just a relationship, but a rhythm. One that didn't ask for permission, one that felt earned. On a crisp October morning, Jamal pulled into the driveway and stepped out carrying a small plant in a terracotta pot. Grace met him on the porch in an oversized sweater and faded jeans. Her hair was tied up loosely, and her hands were wrapped around a mug of black coffee. "What's that?" she asked, gesturing to the plant. "Camellia," Jamal said. "They bloom in late fall. Thought the garden could use something that knows how to show up when everything else is dying back." Grace smiled and stepped aside so he could come in. "You say stuff like that and don't even realize you're writing poetry." He chuckled, setting the plant down on the porch railing. "That's just landscaping wisdom in disguise." They stood together, sipping coffee in silence, watching the street slowly come to life. "I've been thinking," Grace said after a moment, "about digging out the north side of the garden, making space for vegetables next spring. Raised beds would work well back there." Jamal nodded. "Good sun, good drainage. I want to plant things that feed people," she said, "that grow roots deep enough to last through rough seasons." Jamal looked at her, then down at her hand resting lightly on his forearm. "That sounds a lot like what you've already done." That afternoon, they worked side by side in the yard, clearing out old planters, spreading mulch, raking leaves into neat piles along the stone wall. Grace wore gardening gloves that were too big for her hands, but she never complained. She laughed when she slipped in the dirt and cursed when she hit a root she couldn't cut. Jamal offered her his folding knife. She took it without hesitation. As they worked, neighbors passed by on slow walks, a few of them offering quiet nods, some even waving. Not everyone approved, not everyone understood. But the silence they once used as judgment had grown hollow, and Grace no longer filled it with apology. By sunset, they had cleared the whole corner. Grace sat on the back steps, her boots caked in soil, cheeks flushed from the wind. Jamal joined her, handing her a bottle of water. "Not bad for a day's work." "Ugh." She took a long sip, then leaned her shoulder into his. "You know, I used to think the hardest part was starting over, but it's not." "What is?" "Letting something grow again after you've stopped believing it could." Jamal didn't respond right away. He just took her hand and laced their fingers together. "Well, now we've both done it." Later, inside the kitchen, Grace opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked. "Seed money," she said. "For your first company vehicle. Real one this time." He frowned, handing it back. "Grace, don't say no," she interrupted gently. "Not this time. This isn't a gift. It's a partnership." He paused, searching her face. "Why now?" "Because you've stayed," she said. "You showed up when things were ugly. You didn't ask for guarantees. You never needed saving, but somehow, you saved something in me." Jamal slowly took the envelope, tucking it under his arm. "Then I guess I better make it count." "Oh, you already have." They stood together in the kitchen, no longer on opposite ends of grief, no longer standing in the echo of Ethan's absence. That night, Jamal didn't drive home. Instead, they sat on the porch until the stars came out, until the tea went cold, until the silence between them turned warm and sacred. And as the camellia sat quietly at the edge of the porch, its roots beginning to settle into new soil, it seemed to whisper the same thing they both now understood. Some things don't bloom when they're told to. They bloom when they're finally safe, when they're finally seen, and they stay because they've chosen to.